There are ancient texts that hide more than they say. For example, this week's Parashah Vayera in the book of Genesis begins with a scene that has fascinated theologians, philosophers, and also those who believe we are not alone. Abraham, the patriarch, receives a visit from three mysterious beings. The text says they were men, but many interpret this as angels. But what did he really see? Some sages of Judaism and Kabbalah speak of celestial messengers, others of spiritual energies. And there are those who interpret the ancient stories as describing something more physical, more tangible. Even the Zohar and the Talmud mention multiple worlds, civilizations hidden from human perception. It seems as if the multiverse is a concept older than Marvel movies these days. Today we are going to explore that border between faith and mystery, between the Torah, the Bible, and the unknown. What if those angels didn't come from the metaphysical heavens, but from another, more literal heaven? I'm Abel Flores. Thank you for joining my YouTube channel. Join me until the end of this class, framed within Parashah Vayera 2025, because this class will change the way we understand the word revelation. Well, before beginning, it is only fair and necessary to review the main points of this study portion in the Hebrew Parashah, and thus provide context for today's class. The themes addressed in this Parashah, Vayera, are found in Bereshit, Genesis 18:1 to 22:24. The first theme mentioned in the Parashah, and which will be our focus today, is the appearance of God to Abraham and hospitality. This text is enigmatic because it says that God appears to Abraham through three men or angels, each according to their own interpretation. During the visit of these three beings, God appears to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. Abraham, at 99 years old, runs to greet three visitors, angels in human form, and offers them exemplary hospitality, water, bread, meat. Here too, Abraham is given a message about Isaac. One of the angels announces that Sarah will give birth to a son, Isaac, the following year. Sarah, upon hearing this, laughs incredulously. God gently rebukes that laughter. There is also the intercession for Sodom and Gomorrah, revelation of judgment. God informs Abraham of his decision to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for their wickedness. Abraham's plea. Abraham intercedes, asking for their salvation if there are righteous people. He begins with 50 and goes down to 10. God agrees not to destroy them if he finds at least 10 righteous people, which is the legal or textual basis for the minyan, or minimum group of 10 adult men. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Angels in Sodom. The angels visit Lot. The city is shown to be corrupt. They attempt to abuse the visitors. Lot's escape. The angels order him to escape with his family. Lot delays. The angels hurry him and remove him from the city. Punishment and partial salvation. God rains sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's wife looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. Refuge in the cave and birth of Moab and Ammon. Lot's daughters, believing there are no more men in the world after the apocalypse in Sodom, get their father drunk and conceive Moab and Ben-Ammi, ancestors of the Moabites and Ammonites. Abraham in Gerar and Abimelech. Sarah is presented as a sister. Abraham travels to Gerar and claims that Sarah is his sister. Abimelech, king of Gerar, takes her, but God warns him in a dream. Restitution and blessing. Abimelech returns Sarah with gifts. Abraham prays for Abimelech, and God heals his household. Birth of Isaac and expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael. Fulfillment of the promise. Sarah conceives and gives birth to Isaac. God's covenant is fulfilled. Conflict with Ishmael. Sarah sees Ishmael playing with Isaac and asks Abraham to expel Hagar and Ishmael. Divine protection. Abraham, grieved, receives a divine order to comply. God promises to make Ishmael a great nation. Hagar goes to the desert. God shows her a well and reaffirms the promise. 6. Abraham's covenant with Abimelech. Dispute over a well. Abraham and Abimelech make a pact at Beersheba. Abraham gives 7 sheep to testify that he dug the well. The place is called Beersheba, Well of the Oath, which today is a city in the south of the modern state of Israel. The binding of Isaac, Akedah Yitzhak, supreme test. God tests Abraham by ordering him to sacrifice his son Isaac on Mount Moriah. Absolute obedience. Abraham prepares to comply. At the last moment, an angel stops him. Substitute ram. Abraham sacrifices a ram in place of his son. Renewal of the covenant. God swears to bless Abraham, multiply his descendants, and that all nations will be blessed in his seed. Descendants of Nahor. Genealogical list. The Parashah concludes with the genealogy of Nahor, Abraham's brother. Among his descendants, Rebekah, Isaac's future wife, is mentioned. thus paving the way for the transition to the next narrative, or parashah. As you can see, this is a Torah portion with a wealth of content and crucial themes in biblical eschatology and the foundations of faith in Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam. But our topic today is aliens. Now we enter into a very pertinent study for understanding the in-depth philological and exegetical context of the word Vayeira. This is about the phenomenon of the consecutive vav or conversive vav letter, and how Torah commentators address it. In fact, understanding this is part of biblical grammar, which is an ancient Hebrew that is the basis of modern Hebrew, but often uses a syntax different from the Hebrew spoken today. You must remember that many other parashiot in their names begin with the letter vav, and this not only conjugates the letter and, but also modifies the verb tense. The literal meaning of Vayeira comes from the Hebrew root ra, which means to see, to appear, to show. Direct translation, and it appeared, or and it appeared. In the context of Genesis 18:1, the verse opens with, "And the Lord appeared to him at the oaks of Mamre." Here the verb is in the narrative past tense, appeared. This is due to a linguistic phenomenon in the Torah and ancient Hebrew, the consecutive or conversive vav, because it basically converts the verb iara, which is a future tense, into the past tense. One of the most complex and fascinating aspects of biblical Hebrew is the use of the letter vav, and at the beginning of verbs. In classical Hebrew, adding the particle and, vav with patak and dagesh, to the verb in the imperfect form, which normally expresses the future, converts it into the past tense. The hidden message here is that in the Torah, the past is the future, and the future is the past. In other words, in the Torah, there is no time. This phenomenon in Hebrew is called vav haipuch, literally the vav of inversion or conversion, because it converts the verb tense. And as I already told you, there are many parashiot that have this characteristic, such as Vayelek. For example, in this parashah, when the letter vav is attached to the verb that follows it, it changes from yireh, meaning he will see, in the imperfect future tense, to Vayera, meaning and he appeared, in the narrative past tense. This is not a simple grammatical change. In biblical linguistics, it reflects how Hebrew narrative dynamically links past events, and in the mystical tradition, it is interpreted as a code where grammatical tense has a spiritual meaning, linking past, present, and future. In the classic interpretation of commentators such as Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, 11th century France, Rashi explains that Vayeira indicates an open and direct divine revelation to Abraham. It is not a dream or an indirect prophetic vision, but a manifest appearance of the divine presence. Ramban Maimonides, in 13th century Spain, emphasizes that the past tense, Vayeira, marks historical continuity. What happens to Abraham sets a precedent for his descendants. Furthermore, the use of the consecutive vav links this episode to the previous promise, circumcision in Genesis 17, demonstrating the cause and effect relationship. Because Abraham was not the same person after circumcision, there was a conversion. In fact, Abraham is known as the first convert in the Bible. The Malbim of the 19th century interprets this conversive vav, that is, the vav that attaches to or modifies the future tense of the verb to see, not only as a grammatical device, but as a sign of spiritual progression. What was to be the future becomes the historical present. In other words, the biblical narrative does not recount the dead past, but rather transforms the prophesied future into an already lived experience. This is why some Kabbalists speak of the history of the future, because for the eternal God, there is no time. The Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah 48:10, observes that Vayeira appears at key moments of revelation to Abraham and Moses at the burning bush. The idea is that the word marks transformative encounters where the eternal future bursts into history past. This is why Kabbalah teaches that there is a way to change the past, that is, your actions and misdeeds that were already committed in the past, and it is through teshuvah, repentance. Although this is not today's class, what is happening in this parashah is that Abraham, who converted, was circumcised, and had his faith credited to him as righteousness, is becoming a new person. So the evil edicts with which he was born begin to change, because he is no longer the same person. Some commentators, such as the Vilna Gaon, point out that this phenomenon of timelessness in the Torah unites human and divine time. The future, promise, becomes the past, fulfillment. The past is reinterpreted as the continuous present, a living memory among the people. Now let's talk about Abraham's three visitors in this Parashah of Vayera, both from a classical Jewish exegesis and a Kabbalistic interpretation. The biblical account, Genesis 18:1-8, is as follows. Abraham, newly circumcised, is sitting at the entrance to his tent in Mamre when he sees three men approaching. He runs toward them, welcomes them with hospitality, water, bread, meat, and milk, and converses with them. The text alternates between calling them anashim, men, malakhim, angels, and in certain passages, the presence of God himself. This is key to understanding the Torah, because the messenger who bears the name of God is like God himself, although no one can be God, but it is a matter of Hebrew jurisprudence. The classical rabbinic interpretation is that of Rashi, the literal exegete of Judaism par excellence. So each visitor had a specific mission. 1. To announce the birth of Isaac to Abraham and Sarah. 2. Healing Abraham from circumcision. And 3. Destroying Sodom and saving Lot, Abraham's nephew. And this is key. According to Rashi, one angel does not fulfill two missions, hence the need for three. For his part, Ramban Maimonides insists that the vision is not a dream, and he emphasizes this because according to Maimonides, it is a dream. But we won't get into this debate, which is extremely interesting for understanding the relativity of Judaism. Then Maimonides says they are angels with human appearance, because you should know, and today we are going to study this, that in the Torah and Judaism, there are different types of angels. Another key here is that Abraham's hospitality is a model of Jewish ethics, chesed. For Ibn Ezra, the three visitors are not ordinary men, but heavenly messengers who manifest themselves in an understandable way. And the Talmud, Bava Metzia 86b, says that the scene demonstrates Abraham's greatness. Greater is hospitality to guests than to receive the Shekhinah. In fact, in the enigmatic epistle to the Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 2, we have a direct allusion to this. It says, "Do not forget to entertain guests, for by it some have entertained angels without knowing it." Lurianic Kabbalah teaches that the three angels are like three sephirot, or manifestations. Kabbalists, especially in the Zohar, verses 101a, see the three visitors as manifestations of the divine sephirot, Kesed, goodness, Michael, who brings the good news of the birth of Isaac, the son of promise, which is why Michael is always linked to Israel. Gevorah, strictness, Gabriel, who brings about the destruction of Sodom, and Rachamim, Tiferet, balance, Raphael, who heals Abraham and balances justice and mercy. In Lurianic Kabbalah, there is a divine triangle which has nothing to do with the Trinity postulated by Catholic doctrine, where these three angels represent the higher triangle of spiritual life. Thus, Abraham, the man of goodness, receives in his own flesh the visit of the cosmic forces that sustain the universe. And they are not three distinct figures, but three emanations of divine unity acting in the concrete. But don't be confused. They are not God, but they do manifest divinity. There is a mystical dimension to hospitality here. Abraham's act of welcoming them is not only a courtesy, but also a tikkun, reparation, opening the channel for the higher powers to descend into the material world. The bread and wine he offers reflect symbols of the union of the spiritual with the physical. The tent open to the four winds is a symbol of Abraham as the axis between heaven and earth. Now we enter into a detailed study of the different types of angels according to Maimonides and Kabbalah, with their definitions and biblical examples. The angels according to Rambam Maimonides. In his work Mishneh Torah, Hilkot Yesodei HaTorah 2:7, Maimonides describes a hierarchy of 10 categories of angels, based on the Talmud, Midrash, and the Aristotelian philosophical tradition. For him, angels are separate intellects, intermediaries between God and the world. The 10 levels, from highest to lowest, are as follows. 1. Chayot HaKodesh, living holy beings. Highest level, close to the divine throne. Example, Ezekiel's vision, Ezekiel 1:5-14. 2. Ophanim, wheels, angels that revolve like wheels of fire. Example, Ezekiel 1:15-21. 3. Eralim, divine heroes, associated with strength and courage. Example, Isaiah 33:7, the Eralim will weep outside. 4. Kashmalim, angels of fire and energy, that is, angels of electricity. In fact, this is the Hebrew word for electricity. Example, the vision in Ezekiel 1:4, appearance of Kashmal. 5. Seraphim, fiery angels who praise God. Example, Isaiah 6:2. Seraphim were above him, each with 6 wings. 6. Angels, messengers. These are angels on a direct mission to the human world. For example, angels who visit Abraham in Genesis 18 may or may not have human appearance. They are the most frequently cited and named angels in the entire Bible. 7. Elohim. These are angels of authority, associated with heavenly governments, and have one of the 72 names of God, which is why they are called Elohim. For example, in Psalm 8:6, you have made him a little lower than Elohim. 8. B'nai Elohim, sons of God. These are angels who execute judgments. For example, in Job 1:6, the B'nai Elohim came to present themselves before God. Satan is one of these angels, and he is not a rival of God. On the contrary, he is a servant of the Holy One, blessed be he. Snow, cherubim, cherubim, guardians of the sacred. For example, in Genesis 3:24, cherubim guard Eden. 10. Ishim, which means men. They are angels in human form. This is the level closest to man. For example, the Ish, who fights against Jacob in Genesis 32:24. And in our parashah today, these 3 visitors are also called Ishim, or men. That is, the 3 visitors are named Ishim, men, malakhim, messengers, and God himself is also named, meaning one could have been Elohim. So there are 3 visitors, but each is from a different level, because the Hebrew biblical text itself names them that way. But of course, these details are not seen in the translation. Now, let's define mystical concepts, because all of this we're talking about is mysticism. In Kabbalah, angels are not entities separate from God, but emanations of spiritual energy. They are considered dynamic forces that connect the Sephirot with the world. That is, angels are Sephirot. The Sephirot are manifestations. So angels are spiritual manifestations that in some cases are physical and visible, but in most cases they are not. The main types of angels, according to Isaac Luria's Kabbalah, are 1. Michael, who is Chesed, goodness, protector of Israel, angel of mercy. Example, Daniel 10:13. Michael is called one of the chief princes. 2. Gabriel, Gevurah, strictness, justice, bearer of judgments and punishments. Example, Daniel 8:16. Gabriel interprets the vision. 3. Raphael, Tiferet, healing and harmony, angel of healing and balance. Example, Book of Tobit, apocryphal. Raphael accompanies and heals. According to this study, these 3 angels are the 3 who appeared to Abraham. 4. Uriel, Chokhmah, light, wisdom, guide in knowledge and revelation. He is named in the Midrashic tradition, but does not appear by name in the Tanakh or Bible. 5. Metatron, Keter Malkut, the highest of the angels according to the Zohar, prince of the face. Example, interpreted as the angel of God in Exodus 23:20. And this angel is an Elohim, because he bears one of God's names, Elohim. There is a philosophical comparison between Rambam Maimonides and the mystical Kabbalah. Maimonides rationalizes angels as separate intellects, a static hierarchy influenced by Aristotle. In contrast, in Lurianic Kabbalah, which is different and even opposed to that of Maimonides, a rationalist, angels are understood as living energies of the Sephirot, dynamic forces that are activated according to the tikkun of the world. These 2 versions exist in Judaism. They coexist and respect each other. But there is one point in common. Both see angels as intermediaries between the infinite and the created, which is basically the concept of the tree of life and the Sephirot. Now let's get down to business, because we're going to conduct an academic study on the hypothesis of angels similar to or identical to extraterrestrials in the Bible. In a linguistic context, what does angel mean in the Bible? The Hebrew term malach literally means messenger, without implying an extraterrestrial ontology, because even a messenger can be a human being, as in the case of the biblical prophets. So, it's an ambivalent term, because it can refer to a human or celestial emissary depending on the context. Other classes, such as cherubim, and seraphim, are throne-bearing beings and guardians of the divine realm. Iconographically winged and composite, lion, bull, eagle, human, in line with the ancient East, not humans from another planet. Many of them were considered true gods in ancient pagan cultures, and that's why we have many references to them in ancient archaeology, because pagans believed they were gods. The Bible shares with its surroundings the idea of a divine court, a supreme God assisted by celestial beings who execute decrees. In Israel, these beings are subordinate to the one Creator, as in Psalm 82, Job 1, and 1 Kings 22. Ezekiel 1 describes the Merkava, chariot throne, Ford Hayat, living beings, composite faces, and wheels within wheels, ophanim, a theophany that expresses God's mobility and sovereignty in exile, not a technological artifact. There is a very popular and interesting argument these days about ancient astronauts. What does a popular hypothesis affirm that holds that descriptions such as those in Ezekiel 1 or Genesis 6, B'nai Elohim, are encounters with ships or non-human beings mistaken for gods and angels? It was widely disseminated beginning in the mid-20th century by von Daniken, Sitchin, and the famous television series Ancient Aliens. Critical literature classifies it as pseudoscientific. Typical features of the plot are a technological analogy. Wheels within wheels, fire and noise are therefore engines and propellants. Interpretive anachronism. Symbolic texts are read with modern aerospace categories. Translation hypothesis. Angelic names would be ranks of pilots, visitors. However, this raises serious methodological problems, such as anachronism and decontextualization. The symbolism of cherubim/seraphim is consistent with the iconography of the Levant and Mesopotamia, winged guardians, sphinxes, winged bulls, not with cockpits, suits, or engineering. Because today's UFO sighting reports don't reveal fire or sound, but rather a technology simply unknown. In literary genre, the prophetic visions from Ezekiel 1 and Isaiah 6 are highly symbolic theophanies. Reading them as technical reports undermines the literary genre of that era. Technically, in philology, the science that studies and interprets ancient texts, the Hebrew word malach, which translates as messenger, is also used with humans, and there is no biblical lexicon that defines inhabitant of another planet. However, if we understand what the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews said in chapter 13, verse 2, "Do not forget to entertain, for by so doing some have entertained angels unwittingly." Here we have proof from almost 2 millennia ago that at that time they simply didn't know if they were humans or extraterrestrials, because they looked the same. Is there any room for an extraterrestrial reading? Certain superficial convergences, blinding light, dissensions, noise, fear, instructing beings, recall modern reports of UFOs or anomalous encounters. The important thing here, before affirming or denying this, is that you need to know that there's a hypothesis in biblical interpretation that some angels are aliens or extraterrestrials. And if you recall the difference between the 10 types of angels we studied a while ago, then there are some that fall into this category. Now, a key question. What does Judaism say about aliens or extraterrestrials? Let's conduct a critical and documented study of Jewish sources, classical and contemporary, that admit or reject or qualify the possibility of extraterrestrial life, and how they are supported by the Talmud and the Zohar. The basic texts often invoked are the Talmud. Avodah Zarah 3b speaks of God walking through 18,000 worlds, Almin. The expression is Agadic and does not define whether they are inhabited planets or spiritual realms, but several authorities cite it to open the door to other worlds. Meroz, Judges 5:23 in the Talmud Moed Katan 16a, and Shavuot 36a in the related discussion, records 2 readings. Meroz would be a great man or a star or planet. The mention of its inhabitants has been read by some as an allusion to extraterrestrial life. This is a possible reading, but not a consensus. But you should know that there is little consensus in Judaism today. The Zohar frequently speaks of many worlds, olamot, above and below. Most contexts are spiritual worlds in mystical hierarchies, not astronomy. Even so, the notion of a plurality of worlds fueled speculative readings. Because in the end, and as always, everyone interprets as they see fit, and this has been a problem throughout human history. There are rabbis who admit or see the possibility of the existence of extraterrestrial life, such as Hasdai Kreskis, 14th and 15th centuries. In his work, Or Hashem, Part 4, there is no theological reason to deny other worlds, and Avodah Zarah 3b, the 18,000 worlds, is cited as support for the idea of a divine providence that extends beyond our own. Kreskis does not prove habitability, but maintains the real possibility. Rabbi Pinchas Eliyahu Horowitz, Sefer Habrit, 18th century, accepts the existence of creatures in other worlds, but without free will. He uses Meroz as a planet or star with inhabitants, Moed Katan 16a, and harmonizes this with the oneness of the Torah for humans. Now this next one is a very famous rabbi, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of the 20th century, and, for some of his disciples, a candidate for Mashiach ben Yosef. He said in his 1969 speeches after the moon landing that the Torah allows for life on other planets, and used Meroz as a star or planet with inhabitants to illustrate this, although he deduced that if they existed, they would not have free will, not humans, in the halakhic sense. There is also Rabbi Norman Lamb, Tradition 1965, who has a modern academic approach, and in The Religious Implications of Extraterrestrial Life, Tradition 7.4, he elaborates on a Jewish exotheology. Possible alien life does not threaten faith. It invites us to distinguish between the image of God and the human halakhic sphere. Other contemporary voices, pro-possibility, with nuances, such as the famous Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in his essay on extraterrestrial life, compile sources, Kreskis, Sefer Habrit, Zohar, Meroz, and conclude that Judaism is not opposed to extraterrestrial life. However, there is a debate about the free will of these beings. That is, Judaism does not really debate extraterrestrial existence, but the discussion is about the extraterrestrial essence, and above all, about whether they have free will or not. And now perhaps you understand that this was the ancient debate, partly compiled by Maimonides, and partly by the Arizal. These two schools have always been debating, and those who study the Mishnah with me in our free course know that this bipolarity, or ambivalence, dates back to the time of the Second Temple with Hillel and Shammai. We also have one of the great sages of our generation, Rabbi Yosef Dob Soloveitchik, who sadly died during the pandemic. Secondary sources cite him as not being problematic for Judaism, given that other ways of life exist. Incidentally, as an anecdote, I was able to visit the home of this prestigious rabbi in the Israeli city of Bnei Brak on one of my trips. But there are also rabbis who reject or limit the extraterrestrial idea. Like Rabbi Yosef Albo, 15th century, in his Sefer HaIkarim, he takes a critical stance toward the existence of other beings with free will. Note that this is the true discussion among the sages of Judaism. If creation is ordered to human beings and the Torah, other humans would be superfluous and theologically problematic. Several authors cite him this way. Some exact formulations are debated, and the precise locus is disputed, but the conceptual line is clear in the tradition. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, another great Talmudist of our generation, although he has since passed away, also around the time of the pandemic, and when asked about aliens and UFOs, he responded, nonsense, without elaborating on microbes' simple life. The academic reading suggests that he was referring to ufology and visitations, not the abstract possibility of life. Thus, we can conclude that there are indeed important rabbis, medieval philosophers, Kabbalists, and modern thinkers who consider the existence of extraterrestrial life viable and support their interpretation in the Talmud and the Zohar, and there are sages who reject it, especially if it involves free will comparable to that of humans or dismiss ufology. In philological terms, no canonical text proves aliens, but the Jewish theological framework is broad enough not to be threatened by a possible scientific discovery. In other words, Judaism interprets that if there is intelligent extraterrestrial life, this is the real argument with free will. There would be no problem of faith in the sources of traditional rabbinic Judaism. That's all for today's class. Until the next video.